This is 17-year-old Lisa Holm, a quiet summer evening in Blomberg, Sweden. A routine shift at a small countryside cafe. And then, she's gone. Within hours, the entire area mobilized. Volunteers, helicopters, police lines across open fields and farm roads. Because in a village like Blomberg, this doesn't happen. But as the hours became days, the search didn't bring answers. It brought warnings. And 5 days later, investigators walked into a nearby farm building and found a place locals would never forget. They called it the milking room. So what happened to Lisa Holm? What was that room? And who took her? Right on the edge of a safe little town. This is the case of Lisa Holm. It was a gentle Sunday evening in June of 2015. Blomberg was being its usual self. Quiet, tidy, and calm. Rolling farmland. Small roads winding through the forest, a few scattered houses and barns. The kind of place where people don't lock their thoughts because they don't expect to need to. And in a country widely seen as stable and safe, that sense of normal can feel permanent. Until one night proves it isn't. Lisa Holm grew up in Skövde, a quiet town in western Sweden. At 17, she was known as dependable, warm, polite, and mature beyond her age. By the summer of 2015, she had her first job at a small countryside cafe in Blomberg. It was new to her, only a few weeks in. But she took it seriously, so seriously that her parents trusted her to commute on her own. And that night was supposed to be a small milestone. Her first ride home alone on her new moped. On June 7, 2015, Lisa finished her shift at the cafe. At around 6:23 p.m., she texted her father. She said she was basically done locking up, and she'd be on her way soon. The trip usually took about half an hour. A familiar route through forests and farmland. Quiet, predictable. But Lisa never arrived. Minutes passed, then an hour, and that calm certainty her family lived with started to fracture into dread. By 8:00 p.m., her father couldn't wait any longer. He drove toward the cafe, scanning the empty roads for any sign of her. When he arrived, he felt a flash of relief, until it dropped out from under him. Lisa's moped was there, parked neatly beside the cafe. The keys were still in the ignition. Her bag was nearby, and the cafe was dark, silent, empty. He called her name. No answer, just wind and the sound of the trees. At 9:47 p.m., he called the police, and within hours, Blomberg was no longer a village at rest. It was a village searching. Neighbors, friends, local volunteers, people who barely knew Lisa, came anyway. Flashlights swept fields, barns were checked, roads were watched. But the first sweep found almost nothing. No clear signs of a struggle, no obvious trail, no clear explanation. Then came the first subtle detail that changed the temperature of the investigation. In an old barn near the cafe, across the road, police dogs picked up Lisa's scent. The barn looked abandoned, cluttered, dusty, full of stored junk. But in the dirt, investigators found a single black glove, later confirmed to belong to Lisa. And that meant one thing. Lisa had been here, and whatever happened, happened close. As midnight passed, the search expanded fast. More officers, more locals, no one sleeping. By dawn, Blomberg had transformed into a command post. Maps covered in notes, radios buzzing, teams fanning out, a community trying to pull one of its own back from the dark. And as morning arrived, one reality settled in. Whatever fear gripped the village overnight wasn't leaving. Now, to understand what happened next, we need two things: where Lisa was last seen, and what the terrain around that cafe actually looked like. On Monday, the search intensified. Police, soldiers, and hundreds of volunteers combing the countryside. On foot, horseback, and ATVs, fields, ditches, tree lines, barns. At first, they focused close, about 300 meters, roughly 1,000 feet around the cafe. A tight radius means intense coverage, the kind of search where you hope nothing gets missed. But as days passed, the radius expanded, out to about 10 kilometers, roughly 6 miles. And as that circle grows, Every square of ground gets less attention. That's the cruel math of time. By June 10th, an organization called Missing People joined the effort, and 2 days after that, the case shifted again, because the landscape started giving things back. Along a dirt road, about 1 kilometer, roughly 2/3 of a mile, from the cafe, searchers found scattered items: a dark phone case, pieces of a mobile phone, later confirmed to be Lisa's. Further along the same road, more: a torn receipt, a train ticket with Lisa's name printed on it. Then another detail, small but chilling. A friend of Lisa's father drove past the cafe and noticed the barn across the road was no longer sealed with police tape. The same barn where Lisa's glove had been found. He went inside, and in the dust on the floor he spotted pearl earrings catching the light. He recognized them immediately as Lisa's. Her parents confirmed it. The following morning, more items surfaced: her ID card and her house keys, found near a road leading south. And by then, the pattern was hard to ignore. The evidence wasn't neatly placed. It looked scattered, chaotic, like a trail meant to confuse. By June 11th, 4 days after Lisa disappeared, the search expanded again, now encompassing nearby farms and estates. And one of those places mattered more than anyone realized. Martorp Farm sat roughly a mile from the cafe. Modest, weathered, the kind of property you'd pass without looking twice. At the time, it was home to 3 migrants from the Baltics. On June 12th, volunteers began sweeping the area around that farm, and then something happened that made people stop and recheck their instincts. 2 of the residents, 1 man and 1 woman, approached the volunteers. They insisted police had already searched. They told the volunteers not to waste their time, but the urgency didn't feel helpful. It felt defensive. The man was tense. He pushed them to leave, and he warned that if they didn't, he'd call the police. The volunteers didn't back down. They continued searching, and the man's behavior, meant to push attention away, did the opposite. It raised alarm, enough that the volunteers called officers to the scene. When police arrived, they were ready to search every inch, because by now, too many of Lisa's belongings had been found along roads leading toward this property. As daylight began to fade, officers spread out across the grounds with flashlights, and just outside a shed, in tall grass, searchers spotted something that felt like a gut punch. A dark jacket, later confirmed to be Lisa's, and beneath it, her white moped helmet. With that, the property was sealed off. The barns, sheds, and outbuildings were searched methodically, step by step. One small white shed toward the back stood out, because the grass leading to the door was trampled down, as if someone had been going in and out. Officers pried the door open. Inside, they caught a smell they recognized immediately. The shed had 2 small rooms, a bedroom area and a locker room, and the odor seemed strongest near the lockers. They opened them one by one, until they reached the one that ended the search. Inside that narrow cabinet, they found Lisa's body. She appeared partially undressed. Her mouth was sealed with gray tape, and around her neck, investigators saw a knotted rope. After nearly a week of searching, it was over, ending in the worst possible way. Detectives in white suits filled the farm through the night, collecting anything they could: fibers, fingerprints, footprints, and more. And news spread fast. The volunteers who had spent days searching, many of them broke down when they learned the outcome. Because Blomberg hadn't just lost a girl, it had lost its sense of safety. Once Lisa was found, attention turned to the people living on the property. And one man stood out immediately, the same man who tried to wave volunteers away. His name was Nerijus Bilavicius, a 35-year-old man from Lithuania. He lived at Martorp Farm with his wife and his younger brother, and the following morning all 3 were arrested for questioning. At first glance, he didn't look remarkable. Quiet, broad-shouldered, a farm worker who kept to himself. He had moved to Sweden a few years earlier for work and a better life, but he never seemed part of the community. Then investigators searched his room, and what they reported finding painted a much darker picture. His computer was packed full of violent pornography and his online history suggested fixation on control and sexual aggression. And according to investigators, the physical evidence was even worse. They stated that DNA linked him to the crime scene, and that Lisa's clothing contained traces of his DNA. The autopsy report, as described in this case coverage, said she had not been sexually assaulted, but the surrounding details, investigators argued, still suggested a sexual motive. Witnesses also described seeing his car near the cafe that evening, idling, watching, and a surveillance camera at a local gas station reportedly captured him later that night. By the time police sat him down, they believed they already knew what he was. Not a stranger in the dark, a threat close enough to see the cafe from the road, and yet, he denied everything. In nearly every case, there's one detail that becomes the spine of the investigation. Here it was the locations, because the rooms on this farm, when put together, told a story investigators couldn't ignore. In one of the farm's barns, detectives found a room that had once been used for storing cow's milk. Dust, grime, a neglected, harsh space, but one pipe looked strangely clean, free of dust. When they examined it more closely, they reported finding rope fragments on the pipe and the floor beneath it. And when those were analyzed, investigators concluded the rope used around Lisa's neck matched the type found in that room. That was the room they called the milking room. And based on the evidence described in this investigation, detectives concluded Lisa had been strangled there. They also reported that semen was found in the room and on Lisa's clothing, and that DNA testing matched it to Nereus. He offered an explanation, claiming it came from a separate occasion, but investigators did not accept that. They also described his genetic evidence being present on the rope, on her clothes, on the inside and outside of her garments, and around the barn. They reported finding his blood on Lisa's jacket, suggesting, in their view, that she fought back. And there was another detail investigators reported from near that room, graphic, humiliating, and hard to forget. A pile of human feces, tested and said to belong to Nereus. Investigators believed it happened immediately after the murder. They also returned to the barn across from the cafe, the same one where Lisa's glove was found, and they concluded Nereus had been breaking into it. Inside, they found a small room with a direct line of sight toward the cafe. When they used forensic testing, they reported multiple stains on the walls containing his DNA. To investigators, the picture was clear: a man watching from the shadows, waiting for an opportunity. Nereus's trial began in the fall of 2015. From the very start, it was clear this would be one of the most talked about cases in Sweden. The atmosphere in the courtroom was described as heavy, suffocating, and Lisa's parents sat just a few meters from the man accused of murdering their daughter. The timeline presented by both sides went like this. At around 6:23 p.m., Lisa was closing up the cafe with two co-workers. She texted her father that she'd be heading home soon. After closing, the two co-workers went to catch a bus at the front of the cafe. Lisa went toward the back, where her moped was parked, and that's where, the prosecution claimed, she was intercepted. Investigators believed Nereus had been near the cafe for a long time, watching as she finished her shift. They put forward the theory that he approached under a simple pretext, to ask for directions. They referred to an earlier incident weeks before when he had tried to approach another woman in a similar way. The version presented in court was that he said he didn't understand Swedish and asked Lisa to enter the route into his car's GPS. And as soon as she was inside, investigators believed he incapacitated her. The prosecution then described that she was taken to Martorp Farm and into the outbuildings, most likely the milking room. They described a violent struggle in which Lisa tried to fight back. They pointed to forensic traces, DNA under her fingernails and blood on her jacket, as confirmation. After the murder, investigators described that her body was hidden in a locker inside a shed, and they claimed her belongings were scattered along the roads to divert suspicion. The defense argued that he was framed. They even suggested his wife or brother could have been involved, but after being held in custody, both were found not to be involved in the murder. On November 17, 2015, the verdict was delivered. Nereus Bilovicius was found guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Lisa's murder became a national tragedy, not just because of what happened, but because of where it happened. A place that people trusted, a place that didn't think it needed to worry. The search effort was enormous, hundreds and hundreds of people showing up, hoping to bring her home. And when the outcome became known, that hope collapsed into grief. In Blomberg, life never returned to what it was. Parents became more cautious. The cafe became a place people looked at differently, and the village carried a scar that didn't fade quickly. Lisa's funeral took place on July 7, 2015. It drew more people than the church could hold. Friends remembered her as kind, creative, and full of plans. And one detail still feels brutally unfair. That night was meant to be her first ride home alone, a small step toward independence. Instead, it became the last night of her life. Looking at the timeline, where do you think the most dangerous gap was? The early searches, the delays in finding key items, or how close everything was to where she was last seen? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and as always, thank you for watching.
What would you do if your sister texted you, "See you tomorrow," and tomorrow never came? This is the story of Vilma Andersson, a 17-year-old girl from Sweden. A daughter, a sister, a teenager with her whole life ahead of her. On November 14th, 2019, Vilma disappeared. Her family searched. Her neighbors searched. Over 5,000 volunteers joined the hunt. 5,000 people who refused to give up hope. But sometimes, the truth is hiding closer than we think. This isn't fiction. This isn't Hollywood. This is real. And what happened to Vilma shocked an entire nation. Stay with me, because this story needs to be told. November 14th, 2019. A normal Thursday in Sweden. 17-year-old Vilma Andersson had one simple task: pick up her things from her ex-boyfriend's apartment. She called her mom first. "I'll be spending the evening with a friend," she said. Then she texted her sister Emily, "See you at the dentist tomorrow." But Emily never saw her sister again. The next day came. No Vilma at the dentist. Emily tried calling, straight to voicemail. Her parents tried too. Nothing. For 3 days, silence. Then on November 17th, the family made a decision that would change everything. They went to Tishko's apartment. At first he wouldn't open the door, wouldn't even answer. But eventually, he let them in. When they asked about Vilma, something was off. He acted surprised, almost like the question caught him completely off guard. His story was simple. Vilma came over November 14th, just to grab her things. They argued. She left. And then he added something chilling. "I don't want to talk to her anymore." The family listened carefully. They didn't accuse him. Not yet. But deep down, they knew something was terribly wrong. That same day, Emily made a crucial decision. She posted about her missing sister online. Her parents rushed straight to police. The story spread like wildfire. Local media picked it up. Soon, hundreds of volunteers joined the search. An entire community united, determined to bring Vilma home. Meanwhile, detectives began their methodical work. They needed to interview everyone close to Vilma. Their first call? Tishko. He repeated his story word for word. After November 14th, he never saw her again. He swore he never even left his apartment that night. The interview seemed routine. Then Tishko said something that changed everything. "Maybe she found a new boyfriend," he suggested. Then came the line that made detectives' blood run cold. "She's that kind of girl." To seasoned investigators, this wasn't helpful information. This was deflection. This was blame shifting. And suddenly, Tishko wasn't just a witness anymore. Detectives turned to Wilma's inner circle. Her friends, her family. The story they heard was disturbing. Lately, Tishko had become controlling, possessive, dangerously jealous. Police seized his phone. What they found confirmed their worst fears, message after message of fights, arguments, and threats. Then came the breakthrough. Cell tower data revealed something crucial. On November 14th, around 6 p.m., Tishko's phone had moved. He had left his apartment. He had lied to police. Investigators questioned his cousins next. They'd met him at a local cafe just days after Wilma vanished. When police asked about Wilma directly, Tishko's response was ice cold. "Our relationship is over. I don't care what happened to her." Those words sealed his fate. Tishko Ahmed Kargbo was now their prime suspect. November 19th arrived. Police had their warrant. They were about to search his apartment. What they would find inside would shock even veteran investigators. When investigators stepped inside the apartment, they immediately knew something was terribly wrong. On the walls, traces of violence. Clear signs that a brutal struggle had taken place in this very room. Forensic experts arrived with special chemicals. What they revealed on the bed would haunt even seasoned investigators. A human outline appeared, but this outline was cut off at the base of the neck. The apartment told Wilma's story, piece by piece. Her shoes by the door, her bag on the floor, her wallet, her glasses. Everything she had with her that final night. In trash bags, investigators found more of her belongings. Items someone had tried desperately to hide. Then neighbors began to talk. They'd heard the couple argue before, but November 14th was different. The noise was louder, more violent, more desperate. One neighbor couldn't ignore it anymore. He walked to their door, raised his hand to knock, when suddenly, complete silence. For police, that silence told the whole story. Something violent had happened inside that apartment. Something final. But even with all this evidence, Wilma's body was nowhere to be found. As investigators prepared to leave, one detective snapped a photo of something by the closet door. A simple suitcase. At the time, it seemed completely ordinary. They had no idea what horror that suitcase contained. During another round of questioning, Tishko denied everything, any role in Wilma's disappearance, any connection whatsoever. But police had seen enough evidence. They placed him in custody, suspected of murder. Meanwhile, the blood found in that apartment, the blood on that knife, was racing to the lab for DNA analysis. Soon, they would know for certain if it belonged to Vilma Andersson. But as investigators waited for those results, as Tishko sat in his cell, there was something else the world needed to understand. Vilma wasn't just a missing person case number. She wasn't just evidence scattered in an apartment. She was a vibrant 17-year-old girl whose life had been stolen far too soon. And her story would reveal exactly why this case shook an entire nation to its core. Vilma Andersson should have been celebrating her 18th birthday. Instead, she became the center of Sweden's most heartbreaking missing person case. Born on a summer day in July 2002, Vilma was the baby of the family. Her older sister Emily wasn't just a sibling. She was Vilma's protector, her guide, her best friend. When their parents divorced, both girls handled it with remarkable maturity. They split time between homes, welcomed new stepbrothers with open arms, and found joy in simple moments, like feeding animals on their father's small farm. To everyone around her, Wilma seemed to have it all figured out. Good grades, loyal friends, teachers who adored her work ethic. At 15, she even moved in with Emily, showing incredible independence. But beneath that confident exterior, Wilma was struggling. Like so many teenagers, she felt lost. She questioned where she belonged in this world. She wondered if she'd ever find her true purpose. Wilma had beautiful dreams. She wanted her own apartment, complete independence. She dreamed of becoming an interior designer, creating beautiful spaces where families could build memories. But at 17, those dreams took a back seat. Wilma fell in love. And like many young women before her, she had no idea that this relationship would become her greatest danger. The young man who captured Wilma's heart would ultimately break far more than just her dreams. When 20-year-old Tishko Ahmed Sherzad first saw Wilma, she was just 15 years old. To him, she wasn't a person with dreams and aspirations. She was a target. From their very first meeting, there were warning signs. Signs that everyone who loved Wilma would soon learn to recognize. Signs they'd wish they'd seen sooner. Tishko had spent years perfecting a dangerous skill. He could spot vulnerability from across a room. Pause twos. He knew exactly how to approach a lonely teenager. Pause twos. How to make her feel special before the control began. His difficult childhood, his struggles in Sweden, none of it excused what he was planning to do to Wilma. Because Tishko had learned something dangerous over the years. When you can't control your own pain, building tension, you find someone weaker to control instead. And Wilma, searching for love and acceptance, feeling lost at just 15, was exactly what he'd been hunting for. What Wilma thought was romance. Actually the beginning of a nightmare. Because Tishko didn't want a girlfriend. He wanted complete ownership. Linda had every reason to worry. Her daughter, barely 16, dating a 21-year-old man. But Tishko was clever. He knew exactly how to win over a concerned mother. Slowly, carefully, he convinced Linda he was different. He was mature, responsible. He truly loved Wilma. And Linda, wanting her daughter to be happy, began to believe him. When Emily had her first baby, Wilma felt displaced in her sister's home. She was thrilled to be an aunt, but suddenly felt like an outsider in the place she'd called home. Tishko saw his chance. When Wilma mentioned feeling out of place, he had the perfect solution ready. "Move in with my family," he suggested. "Just temporarily, until we find our own place." At Tishko's family home, Wilma felt welcomed. His father was especially kind, taking walks with her, shopping together, making her feel valued. But what Wilma didn't realize was that this kindness served a purpose. When his family embraced her, it validated Tishko's character. It made Wilma trust him completely. And when someone trusts you completely, they stop watching for warning signs. Soon, Tishko found them an apartment. Finally, Wilma thought, they'd have their own space. For the first time in months, she felt like she belonged somewhere. What she didn't know was that she'd just walked into a carefully constructed trap. The mask came off within weeks. What Wilma thought was love was actually the beginning of a carefully orchestrated prison. First, it was small things. Comments about her clothes, questions about where she'd been. Then Tishko started following her, checking her phone, deciding who she could see. A simple hello to another man would trigger explosive rage. Tishko would make scenes in public, screaming at Wilma in front of strangers, making sure everyone knew she belonged to him. By December 2018, the messages on her phone had turned deadly. Not just angry words anymore, but detailed threats about what would happen if she ever tried to leave. Then came the GPS tracker. Tishko installed an app on Wilma's phone that showed him her exact location, every minute of every day. This wasn't jealousy anymore. This was complete surveillance. The fights became so violent that neighbors could hear them through the walls. Shouting, crashing, sometimes terrifying silence. When Tishko would finally break up with her, Wilma would flee to Emily's house. But within days, he'd return with apologies, flowers, promises to change. And Wilma, desperate to believe in the man she'd fallen in love with, would go back. Linda and Emily watched their vibrant, confident Wilma disappear. The girl who once lit up every room was becoming a shadow of herself. Linda begged her daughter to come home, but Wilma refused. What none of them realized was that leaving an abuser is often the most dangerous time. And Tishko had already decided, if he couldn't control Wilma, no one could. By late 2019, Wilma had become a prisoner in her own home. Days passed in silence, waiting for Tishko to return from work. But while she waited, he was planning a life that didn't include her at all. Tishko had become obsessed with American politics. In his twisted mind, Donald Trump needed his help to win the 2020 election. And Wilma, because she didn't share his political views, had become the enemy. He started calling her Satan. He believed she was working with the Democrats, against everything he stood for. This wasn't jealousy anymore. This was complete psychological breakdown. In September 2019, Tishko bought a plane ticket to Miami. October 30th. He was going to America to help with the election. He never mentioned bringing Wilma with him. When he told Wilma about his plan, she finally understood. After years of control, surveillance, and abuse, he was simply going to abandon her. The fight that followed ended their relationship. On October 30th, Tishko boarded his flight to Miami. But at Stockholm Airport, immigration officials stopped him. Missing travel documents, visa violations. His American dream shattered in minutes. When Tishko returned home, humiliated and furious, he called Wilma. He begged for another chance. And Wilma, still believing in the man she'd once loved, agreed to try again. But this time was different. Emily had finally convinced her sister of the truth. Tishko wasn't the man Wilma needed in her life. In November 2019, Wilma made the bravest decision of her life. She broke up with Tishko. For good. For the first time in years, Wilma began planning her own future. She wanted her driver's license, her independence, her freedom. She'd even arranged lessons with her father. But Tishko had already decided. If he couldn't have Wilma, if he couldn't control her, then no one could. Those driving lessons would never happen. November 28th. 2 weeks after Wilma vanished, police returned to Tishko's apartment. This time, they brought a specially trained cadaver dog, flown in from Germany. But the dog wasn't even needed. The moment investigators stepped inside, they smelled it. Heavy, unmistakable, the smell of death. It led them straight to a closet, to a suitcase they had photographed during their first search, but never opened. When they unzipped it, they found Wilma. But the suitcase was just the beginning. As detectives continued searching, they found more of Wilma's belongings scattered throughout the apartment. Her clothes, personal items, even her childhood stuffed animals. while hundreds of volunteers had spent weeks searching the countryside for Wilma. She had been in Tishko's closet the entire time. The media immediately raised the question everyone was thinking. How had police missed this during their first search? The forensic results came back within days. On the suspected murder weapon, investigators found 14 separate DNA traces. Every single one matched Tishko. DNA analysis of the remains confirmed what everyone already knew. But no one wanted to believe. It was Wilma. Experts could never determine the exact cause of death, but the evidence told a horrific story. Severe injuries, major head trauma. Wilma had suffered tremendously before she died. On Wilma's remains, investigators found Tishko's fingerprints. The same prints appeared on bags containing blood-stained clothing. The evidence was overwhelming. Wilma had been murdered, and there was only one suspect. The search for Wilma became the largest missing person operation in Swedish history. By late November, Sweden's armed forces joined the hunt. Divers plunged into icy waters. Mini-submarines scoured the depths. But it wasn't enough. By December, over 5,000 people were searching. Volunteers, police, military personnel, all desperate to bring Wilma home. They found nothing. Most of Wilma's body was gone forever. For Wilma's family, this meant something unbearable. They couldn't hold a funeral. How do you say goodbye when most of your daughter is still missing? December 6th, Tishko's first custody hearing. When prosecutors laid out all the evidence against him, he said nothing. For 27 minutes, complete silence. Finally, he spoke. "Can I use the bathroom?" Later, when shown photos of what they'd found in his apartment, his only words, "That's brutal." Then silence again. In every interrogation that followed, no comment, but something was happening behind that silence. A psychiatric evaluation suggested he might suffer from a serious mental disorder. The question was this genuine illness or calculated manipulation? Months passed. Then suddenly, Tishko broke his silence. His words were chilling. "Everyone's forgetting that Wilma was the girl I loved. I always did the right thing." Then he said something that stunned investigators. "If I really killed her, I would never have left the head as evidence." March 13th, 2020, official murder charges. Days later, guards found Tishko unconscious in his cell. Beside him, suicide notes. "God knows I am innocent. I am not a killer. I am going to my love. You will never solve Wilma's murder. I decide my own life." Was this a final confession? Or the desperate act of a guilty man trying to escape justice? Before the trial, investigators pieced together Wilma's final moments. November 14th, 2019. Wilma went to collect her belongings from Tishko's apartment. She thought she was safe. But Tishko came home early. An argument erupted. What happened next? Investigators believe was a violent attack that ended Wilma's life. Then came the cover-up. Phone data shows Tishko leaving his apartment at 6 p.m., carrying something heavy, something he needed to hide. But here's what makes this case even more disturbing. While thousands of people searched for Wilma, while her family begged for answers, Tishko was at McDonald's. November 18th, 4 days after Wilma disappeared. He sat there with his cousins, eating, laughing, acting like nothing had happened. Like the girl he claimed to love wasn't decomposing in his apartment closet. May 26th, 2021. The trial began in Uddevalla. Prosecutors painted a clear picture. Tishko killed Wilma using repeated extreme violence. But his defense attorney, Beatrice Ramsell, had a shocking theory. She claimed the evidence was planted. Her argument? Police searched that apartment and found nothing. Then suddenly, days later, they find Wilma's remains? She suggested someone put them there to frame her client. It was a desperate defense. But was there any truth to it? June 16th, the moment of truth. Prosecutors demanded life in prison. The defense? Complete acquittal? The next day, the court made their decision. Tishko would remain in custody for psychiatric evaluation. The question everyone wanted answered. Was he mentally ill? Or just evil? July 15th, the psychiatric report arrived. No severe mental disorder. No psychosis. No excuse. What they found was something far more chilling. Narcissistic personality disorder. Shallow emotions. Zero empathy. Complete inability to see Wilma as anything more than his property. He wasn't insane. He was exactly what Wilma's family always suspected. A cold-blooded killer. July 27th, 2021. Guilty of murder. Guilty of desecrating a body. Life in prison. 230,000 krona in compensation. But here's the truth no court can fix. Most of Wilma's body is still out there somewhere. Tishko didn't just murder his ex-girlfriend. He stole her family's right to say goodbye. He stole their chance for closure. And that might be his cruelest crime of all. Cases like Wilma's remind us why we do this work. Every victim deserves their story told. Every family deserves justice. If you believe these stories matter, if you want to help us honor victims like Wilma, subscribe to The Dark Side, because the truth should never be forgotten. We'll see you next time with another case that demands justice.